Hi everyone, this is Marina from Frocks Frolics with the last part of our wonderful sew along where we're going to finish off this beautiful Charlie Brown pea coat. And in this last installment, we're going to finish the coat. There are a few things that we still have to do. We have to attach the sleeve lining to the shell sleeve. And then also put the lining all the way around the jacket. So if I just open this up real quick, so we'll have to go all the way around. We've got that nice loop that we're catching in as well. That's going to be really cool. And we need to sew the facing against the buttonholes and then put the buttons on. And that's basically it. Fantastic. I hope you really enjoy this and you can be really proud of whatever you've made. So let's get started. So let's get this coat finished now. We're going to put the lining and the shell together now. So the first thing is to pin the facing to the shell and then to put the center back and the center of the shell together. And then I will align my shoulder seams as well of the lining and the shell. So that is perfect. And then I work my way all the way around pinning this. Of course, the whole course is available to you from the playlist. So if you just go in the description, you find the link to that if you want to see what came before this. So I'm going to do this on the other side now as well, all the way down. Make sure everything is nice and straight and, flush. And then I basically have this bag here, which I need to now sew together and then turn. So the good thing is that I've cut away my seam allowance from my interfacing, so I've got a good line to go by for sewing as well. I stretch the fabric because I work with very heavy fabrics, and what will happen here is that the fabrics actually push on top of each other, so that easily happens that one of them might actually, end up with a little pleat. So stretch it while you go. And then when you go around the curve here, you do it stitch by stitch. So needle in the fabric, lift the presser foot, turn it, and then go another stitch or two and another stitch or two until you've come round your curve. And again, make very sure that nothing pushes. Always feed in very straight into your presser foot, so it takes a while to get round. You can see me here moving it round and then feeding it in straight again. Make sure there's no pleats underneath it as well. Keep the rough edges on top of each other, especially in this area here where we've got the lining on the bias, and that might stretch a little bit, so we want to be very careful there that everything is really nice and straight and maneuver around that area. Make sure there's no pleat. You can see I'm stretching it again and I'm helping it out with my fingers. And once we've done that, you check that from where you stitched that the length is the same all the way down to where the hem starts. Check that one out, and if it's not, you might want to move maybe the hemline or something. You must make sure that that tallies at the bottom here. That's really, really important. So put a pin through to check whether it does. If it's a little bit out, you might want to change it, bearing in mind that the top side has to cover the lower side. And then we cut back our seam allowance pretty sharpish here. And I'm also cutting across the corners because my fabric is very thick. With lighter fabrics, you can just fold it, and in fact, that gives you a really nice corner. But when it's this thick, it wouldn't work. So I'm going to have to fold them in. That's why I cut across the corner. And then I'm also cutting back my facing. I leave the shell side exactly as it is, 1 centimeter, and I trim back the facing. And then you cut back the seams as well, and you work your way all the way around, right down to the other side where we have the hem. And again, we can cut this back pretty sharpish and also cut back the corner at this point. Then we want to snip all the curves to release the tension because, well, once we've turned it, of course, there's tension where there's a curve and we don't want that. So everywhere it goes in a bit, I'm going to snip it right to the seam. Also here in the area of the neckline, very important. And now we're ready to turn it through the turning gap. So I grab the furthest part of my jacket from where I have the turning gap, so the opposite side really in the sleeve, and I pull it through from there. And you can see that you need quite a big turning gap, otherwise it could really like just rip. And then I'm lifting out the edges carefully. You might need a pin to help you out with that. And if you just cannot get the front hem to lie properly just by pulling it out with a pin, what you can do is go back in through your turning gap. So I'm just going to go through here and grab that very corner, just lift out that little corner out of the turning gap, and then I'm folding it inwards like that. And I'm holding it with my thumb and then push it back out. And that way you get a really nice corner there, which is no hardship at all. There you go. It's a really, really nice corner. And if it's not good enough, use a pin and lift it in, not from the tip, but slightly from the side. Look, mine is just all bent. I need some stronger steel pins is what I need. I've got embroidery pins here and they really didn't work. Next step is ironing the edge, and we use a damp cloth again, and we're going to put a very hot iron on it until the cloth is dry, then move it off, quickly move on a weight, and then press it down, and that way you get a very beautiful firm edge, just like something you would get from the shop. You can't really get that without the damp cloth. And just press that weight down, wait for all the steam to have come out. When you can see no more steam, you can move it off. And look at that. That is really, really good. And the nice thing is you will never have to iron this again. What you do is, if you get creases in it, hang it up in your bathroom near the shower, and when you have a shower and it's hung up there, the creases will all drop out. At least for a wool jacket, right? And don't forget, you can follow me on Instagram at Frocks and Frolics, and of course also on Facebook. And finally, I go up to the collar as well, and it's amazing how good that looks once you've done this. I really can recommend it. And I'm just using like plain cotton. Handkerchiefs really work well as well. If you get a handkerchief that's just white, then, they're big enough to do all these things, and it's just the right consistency, and you can see through them what you're doing as well. So I've often used that. Of course, now I've got like a roll of white lining fabric in cotton that I use. And for the collar here, I've moved the jacket onto the sleeve ironing board. That makes it a little bit easier because you want to avoid, of course, ironing in a pleat anywhere. That is, something you don't really want. And again, you wait until that's good, and then you can see how beautiful that is. Next, we're going to top stitch it, but not across the back. We're leaving that out because it is very hard to get that right. We're starting at this point, or ending on this point rather, and then this area here is not top stitched. But if you want to top stitch it, of course, it's very important that you pin down the lining like this. You stretch it and then you pin it in place so that you don't get ugly pleats up there. That happens so easily. You really want to pin it. Even for me, even though I'm not going to top stitch there, I'm going to do it. And that will guarantee you, if you pin it, that the outside then will also look quite nice. I'm not doing that. I've said that because I think it's very hard to get that right with a domestic sewing machine, so I'm not even trying. We're going to top stitch the collar from the inside. So from that point to that point, and then from here to there. And from the outside, from that point onwards. The stitching always looks better from the top side. So start top stitching the front first, right? From the upper side of the fabric, from the side of the shell. And you go right up to the point where your collar will start. And that's where we're stopping, because of course then the collar rolls to the outside and that's what you see. So you don't want to go round in one go, because that will never look very nice, unless of course you have an industrial sewing machine, then that will work. Domestic machines really not going to work. So I'm just going to go up to the point where I have marked it that my collar starts. I always put a pin there so I don't go too far. This is where the collar will roll over. So I'm stopping and I'm going to leave a long thread hanging, pull it out and cut it. And we're going to pull those away later. And then I do the other side where I start at the pin and I work my way all the way down. And you can see that it left out a stitch. If it does that, don't worry about it. You can pull those away afterwards. I've shown you this already in another video, so I won't show it again, but it's easier than starting over and over. The likelihood that you'll have a stitch left out is really, really high on domestic sewing machines with really thick fabric anyway. And then don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you know when a new video comes out from Frocks and Frolics and yours truly, Marina. So now we turn it over and we move the needle exactly in to the point where we've ended. This time we're sewing from the inside, so from the facing side. Also make sure your stitch length is really long. 3.5 does look a bit poxy already. I would go for 4. It's nice if it's really long. And then do have a good distance. The distance of course has to be the same for all your top stitching from the edge. So here I'm doing it, and I've actually got a line there on my presser foot for puff, which works really well for me, but it's almost a half a presser foot. It's just slightly over to the left from the edge. So if you've got that puff foot, that's where you want to go for. That works really, really well. And then I get to the curve and I move it round ever so carefully. And I'm just going to the end of the facing here. I'm going no further. And I'll make very sure everything is nice and straight. I'm really very aware that number one, you don't ever want to do any of this twice because the thread's very expensive. It's top stitching thread on the bobbin and the upper thread. So, you know, you don't want to do that. And then I do the same coming down on the other side. This time I start at the lining at the end of the facing and I move forward. Very slowly round the curve. Make sure I turn it round, always move it in straight. So up to that curved area and then I go round. There we go. Stitch by stitch. And if you want to see all of it, like I said, you find the whole course in the description. And then you can watch that. It's all free. And this pattern really is a treat. It's not just beautiful to make. It also fits very well. I tried it on myself. I wanted to keep it. But of course, it wasn't quite my size, you know. When I have time, if that ever happens, I would love to make one for myself. It really is a very good fit, I have to say. Give credit where it's due. Now we're going to pull away those threads And you don't want to tie them off like we've done before on the other items. And you can see how beautiful that now looks when it rolls out, right? The underside would not have been as good. This is so important. You need to do that on all your fine sewing of jackets, to just sew to the start of where the collar rolls over and then do the lower part from the outside. And I am now just pulling my threads away. You have to pull them away quite well, so I'm doing it numerous times. Just go right back in where you came out and pull it away as far as you can, really. Maybe do it a number of times. And you can still get this pattern by ordering the Celebration Winter Edition from 2010. That's so brilliant about Ottobre. They never run out. They just print it again and send it to you, so you can make whatever years later still. If you have a magazine you really love and you say to a friend, well, this is really good, and they want to get it, they can still get it. It's brilliant. And now it looks fantastic all the way down. We're on to our next step, and that is to pin the lining to the shoulder pads. So what I'm going to do is put this on my hand and then go in and straighten it all out first. And what you want to make sure is that the seams of the lining and the shoulder seam of the shell lie on top of each other. So take a pin and then go through from one side to the other. So take that pin and pop it right here where the sleeve starts on, and then just lift the lining over to that point. That way you know it's in the right position. Put a pin in there, and we're going to secure that later. Now we're going to pin the sleeve lining to the shell sleeve, and then we're going to sew it in. Ottobre suggests that you actually do this step before you turn the coat. I prefer to do it now because it's easy to twist it. You can do it the other way, of course, if you know what you're doing already. If it's the first time, don't. What you want to do is make sure it's all straight and then turn in your seam allowances and pin them together at the right very edge here, so you know where they have to go together. And then I'm going in through my turning gap and I'm just pulling that sleeve out. And that way you can't get it wrong. And I think as a beginner that might be better than trying to do it when the coat is not turned yet. Move it out, pull it out, and you can now clearly see what needs to go together, right? So tuck in your sleeve, just like that, just tuck it in. You can then remove that pin and you pin it properly. Now we're going to pin from the lining side, and you make sure that the seams are on top of each other, like that. Turn it round so you can pin from the lining side. Now you do need to let me know in the comments whether you like this, whether I should do more from Ottobre and which ones you might like, because I'm sure going to do this again when I have the winter lull. Now we're coming out of winter, I don't have any lull. I have to work hard on my own patterns, but if you want me to do another one, please let me know, and then next time I am at this point where I don't have a pattern of my own and I want to do some YouTube videos, I can do that for you, so you can look forward to that. Now we're going to sew the lining and shell sleeve edges together, and I just move it round. This is why it's so important to stitch it from the lining side and also have the lining pushed right in, so you've got enough space to do it there. And because the sleeves are actually quite big, it's not hard to do, truly, it isn't. Now it's in, you can see it's like a little loop here, and I'm going to pull that back out, and then we can hem it. Now Ottobre doesn't actually do that, but I think it's nicer if it's hemmed as well. So what we're going to do is put some pins right here on the hem line because it's still loose. We don't want that, so pin it. Don't forget to like this video as well, and please share. It's so important for these pesky algorithms from YouTube, you know. I would really appreciate that. It really helps my little business as well. Now we're turning it back through and hand stitch it or slip stitch it. Again, we need to tuck in the lining because at the moment this would be a bit hard to hand sew. We just tuck the lining back in. You get the little fold where we have the hem and then the rough edge of the shell fabric. And we are going in here, rough edge of shell fabric, picking up a little bit of my hem and then just working my way all the way around. Make sure that your thread isn't pulled tight because you will see that from the outside. It doesn't look pretty, so it's quite loose, but it will make sure that it doesn't move. I'll go all the way to the end. And you could, of course, just connect the seams on top of each other and sew those together. That would probably also hold it, but I like to do this like really well. This is like the tailoring way. And now we're actually done with this. We can turn it through and we get a beautiful sleeve here. So very, very nice. And then of course we have to do the same on the other sleeve. Remove your pins and we're done. Looks really good. Next, we're going to also now attach the lining to the underarm. So make sure that's all nice and straight in here, lies really flush, and that the lining sits on the top of your seam allowance. Okay, so you don't fold the seam allowance down of the shell, you sit it on top the lining. Okay, now we're going to pin the hem of the coat, turn and slip stitch as well. So we're doing always the same. You pin it in, you can't go right to the front and there's no need to do that. You could probably just tuck it in where you have the side seam, but I would suggest that you hand stitch that in. It is really nice, it takes you a few minutes and then you have a beautiful result. And it'll look really, really pristine. As you can see from the coat here, worn by our lovely Magdalena, my little model. She's so nice. She's now 11 years old, just turned 11. And she's been modeling for me since she was 3.5 years old. So when you go on my website, you can see all the pictures of Magdalena growing up, really. Every year are different collections. So what a lovely girl. And it's the same as before. You want to pick up very little from the hem and a little bit more from the rough edge because nobody's going to see that. If it's a little bit too tight, you might want to tack on it just to ensure it's not. We don't want to see any of that. It should be nice and loose. And then we can turn it back to the outside and basically it's done. So just take out your pins now. And there it is, absolutely beautiful. Next step, we're going to sew in the lining. And just a few tuck stitches here. There we go. And you want to make sure that you sit right on top of that seam on the edge rather than lower down where it's actually sewn together. Now we're sewing the lining to the shoulder pads and then you just stitch in the ditch, so to speak, all the way up, right through the shoulder pads so it holds it together. The Ottobre magazine suggests to put the shoulder pads in way later at this point, really, and I like the shoulder pads to be in way earlier, which is what I did because then you can arrange it better. It's just an easier way of working, I think. And now that that's in, really can't go anywhere anymore. And we now can slip stitch the front facing to the buttonholes. And the nice thing is you don't have to be scared of doing buttonholes at the end. You've done them at the beginning. If there was an issue, you could have put it right. The worst thing is putting buttonholes in at the end and finding you made a mistake or the whole garment is ruined or it looks really bad. These buttonholes might take a little bit longer, but boy, do they look professional. And you don't have this feeling at the end, oh boy, I'm not sure my sewing machine can cope with buttonholes in this. And I can guarantee you, if it's really heavy fabric like mine, it probably will not be able to cope with it. And it's a damn shame if you have that at the very end. So I would go through the effort of putting these bound buttonholes in. I am doing the cheats technique here again. And I think anybody can do that. It's really simple. It's not hard. You just follow the steps. Look at the video where I show you that. It's in the description, of course, part of this course. And once that's done, you got beautiful buttonholes. I removed the outer line there. It really looked way too close to the edge. It looked really awful. So by the magic of the internet and video editing, I just unpicked it, steamed it up real quick. It came right out my stitching line. And so it looks really beautiful. That's it. Now we can close the turning gap. That's the last step almost, isn't it? And then we just have to sew the buttons on. Whoop, whoop. So we're going to slip stitch this, and we're doing it in a way that we kind of tunnel through. So we pick up some fabric and tunnel through, come out, and exactly the opposite side we go back in, and then go inside that crease a bit, and then opposite side again, go in there and go in the crease a little bit, come out, opposite side again in the crease a bit. So that's what you do all the way to the top. And then if you want to, you can also work your way back down to just make sure that this doesn't come apart again. But if you do fairly small stitches, that's absolutely fine too. And of course, you could just put those creases on top of each other and do it with a sewing machine. That way, if you need to go back in, it's really easy to undo and then just go over again. Last step, my friends, we're going to put on the buttons. So I've got pop-up buttons here, and then I've got these really lovely plastic buttons to go on the front. Okay, so I put my button where I wanted it to be. This looks good. And then you need to measure from the edge of your pocket really to make sure that the buttons look in the right position as to the distance from those pockets. Right, so I go from the edge, and that's just over 2 inches in my case, and I go through where I want my button to sit, right through there, and then I open it up. Now you need to pay attention that the distance from the finished edge is 3 inches for boys, mine is 4 inches. So you would be further over and you would sit in the facing. I'm sitting in the pocket, which was not ideal. But because Magdalena is very slender and she is a girl, I wanted it to come over a little bit more so the fit is a bit more snug. It's not much, but it just makes a difference if you make it for a girl. I would go for those 4 inches that I did, for a boy 3 inches from the edge. And then when you sew on your button, you need to make absolutely sure that you don't put it in tight. You need to leave a little stem here. What I do is I put my thumb underneath it. So I get this little stem, like a little mushroom, we used to say when I was training as a tailor. Get a little mushroom. So that when you close the jacket, you actually have room for the top layer. And I'm just wrapping around the thread from the top to the bottom, pull it away, have a loop, and then I'm going through all the way to the other side. And there I can pull away the thread again as well. I'll do it a few times because I don't want this to come apart. And I've used my top stitching thread because I think that's really nice. You could go in a crossway fashion as well, but I think like this is actually really cool. Right, next button, same again, put it where you want the button to be. Of course, you can also measure now the distance from the edge. So just put my finger there, there's where it needs to go. Measure from the edge, in my case it was 4 inches. Don't forget, if you make it for a boy, it'll be 3 inches. The overlap is less, and here I'm in the pocket again. That wasn't ideal. So if I did it again for a girl with a 4 inches, what I would do is use an under button and put these buttons on possibly even earlier than this. Just put the button on and measure it out so that you can go in there before you close the turning gap, and then you have a button underneath it to ensure it doesn't rip out, and so that just to the top layer and not all the way through, so you are not in the pocket. Now Magdalena said it didn't bother her, But I thought that, yeah, there is only a little gap for a hand to go through. You can see it, can't you? Because that's how I did it. Right, now we're going to also put the button on the other side. That's the 4 button. So I'm measuring again exactly where it sits, and I make sure that that button sits exactly in the same position to that. And I'm going to now put pins everywhere where they need to go. So first of all, I'm going to put 1 pin in horizontally and then 1 pin vertically, and I'm just quickly measuring this again. It's worthwhile measuring this out for all of them, even though you could probably do it by eye, and then I can sew those on as well all the way. And next we're going to put the poppers on. So I'm going to sew the stud on first. That goes right underneath the buttons that I've just sewn on, so right in the center. So I need to open it up and just put these underneath. So roll it over. That's where they go. Find the center of the button. You can feel that. You don't need to measure that. And you put a pin in there. And I do that, of course, for all 3 of them. The real fun starts, of course, then putting the socket on after. That's where it's interesting again. And instead of putting buttonhole stitches all the way around, with a little knot on the top, I'm just going plainly round it. I think that's good enough. So now I'm going to close it and just make sure that the overlap at the lower edge is all correct. Right, make it really nice and flush so it sits in the right position, because now we're going to put the popper on that will actually hold all of this in place. This is very important that we don't move this now, that it stays in this position. Okay, so I'm just putting my finger on there to hold it, and then I roll it over a bit so I can see where my socket has to go. That needs to correspond, of course. And that's exactly the spot there. So once we know where that goes, I'm going to sew that in as well. And I'm again just going over and over, really. I'm not doing any buttonholing stitches here. You can do that if you know how to do that, but I thought, oh no, I just want to get that now. And also, if you're using the standard thread and not the top stitching thread, it does get tangled a bit as well. So once that's done, one last check, do it up to just make sure that you've put it in the right position and you don't end up putting them all in and then you have to do it again because it wasn't quite right. And that looks pretty good. Yep, it's all good. So I can now do all the other ones as well. So the stud on right underneath the button, and then you can sew the corresponding one on again as well. It's very important you close the coat for that so you get it in the right place here. So I'm going to close that. And then I can see where it needs to go. Mark it again with a pin right in that point. You can do the top one as well if you like at this point. Roll it over to get right to that point. Put a pin in where you're going to sew it on, right in the center. There we go. And then you might want to check that distance again as well, that it's the same for all of them. And that should work out just fine. There we go. So sew those on. Do up the coat, and guess what? You are actually finished with your coat. This has been a monster project for me to do, and I'm sure it's a monster project for you to make, but man, you can learn so much here. It is an absolutely fantastic coat. And that's it. We are absolutely done. Don't forget to like and share this video, and I hope to see you soon again for another project with Frocks and Frolics. Bye for now.